Hello, I'm Jonathan Josephson. Would love for you to watch this video to learn about my upcoming play collection, Seven Deadly Tens, which is coming through Original Works Publishing. I've been very fortunate to have a bunch of my plays produced and a number of them published. And my latest project, I've been working with Original Works Publishing, Jason Aaron Goldberg and the fantastic folks based right here in LA. Are going to publish 7 of my short plays in a collection called Seven Deadly Tens. I've written a number of 10-minute plays that have been done in some really amazing venues. I had a play in the Humana Festival a few years ago. I had a play with the Sam French Festival. And just short plays generally have always been so appealing to me because you can take an idea and there's no subplot, there's no secondary story or rebuttal in a 10-minute play. You have an idea and you can just grab on and really sink your teeth in and come up with something explosive and just deal with it and ask audiences to deal with it. And that's been really fun. So I take that approach and I apply them to different themes and different ideas. So Seven Deadly Tens is actually 7 different plays that I've written over a course of about 10 years. I didn't set out to link them thematically, but just as I was looking at my plays that weren't yet published, it occurred to me that, wow, all of these plays have instances of people behaving badly. And some of that I think just speaks to drama and the nature of theater, that if everybody's being nice to everybody all the time, you don't have much of a play, you don't have a lot of conflict. So some of it is built into what theater is about. Somebody somewhere is going to make a mistake, and worse than a mistake, they're probably going to do something bad. They're going to have ill intent. And as I was really looking at the plays, it's slotted out perfectly with Dante's iconic 7 deadly sins. What he determined were sort of the elite groupings of bad human behavior that maybe even are uniquely human. That we don't see antelopes acting with pride or jealousy. Although I would argue my cat can do any of the 7 deadly sins. She definitely is prideful and envious and all of those things when she's not getting the attention. She has a little streak of gluttony in her too. So maybe that's wrong. Maybe it's not exclusively to humans. But man, we sure see it a lot. And I was seeing it as each of these plays were being, as I was just rereading them. Some of them I hadn't looked at in quite some time. So I reached out to Jason. Original Works has published another one of my short plays. And they're really the only publisher that I could find that's publishing collections of short plays by a single playwright who hasn't won a Pulitzer or an Oscar or something like that. There are a number of short play collections that I have. I have 1 play out of 10 or 1 play out of 50. But they were really the only ones who were saying, hey, what happens if we let a playwright's voice be showcased over 6 or 7 or however many different plays? So I just laid them all out, and it really had a pretty great flow, just in terms of producibility, things that are appropriate, potentially even for Zoom. When I started on this process, I was a lot more optimistic about the future of Zoom theater. And that was actually a big part of my initial conversation with Original Works is, what if we, and I've talked about this with Stage Rights and other publishers too, what if we provide virtual backgrounds, or what if we give insight as to how one might stage or create this play in a virtual space? And honestly, Jason was not terribly into that idea. He said, I want the plays to be great plays. I don't want to plan for Zoom. I want to plan for being back in theaters. And I think that actually was very wise. So we moved away from that idea and said, how about if we just give 7 really excellent plays that can be produced by probably a small theater company, more likely a college or even a high school. Some of them are maybe not high school appropriate. But that's challenging roles for young actors. There's something fun for directors to unlock and really develop, and would be enjoyable for varied and diverse audiences. That they're not about sin in a didactic or anything close to a religious way, but they are people behaving badly, and they are opportunities to look at that bad behavior and say, how did this ever become acceptable? And start to actually have moral questions and moral conversations afterward, without getting too heady about it, because some of the subject matter is a little scatological. But I think that in lies exactly where some of these themes become most vivid. So I could talk about each of these 7 plays. It's been really a joy to just revisit all of them. Some of them are new, and some of them it's like, wow, rereading this, like, first of all, like, major edit, even though it's been produced a couple times. Like, how could I have ever been so foolish as a 29-year-old, and of course as a 37-year-old, what will 47-year-old me say? These are the plays in 7 Deadly Tens. The first one is my lust play, This Hungry Churchyard, which is set 3 days after the end of Romeo and Juliet, and we are introduced to Benvolio and Rosaline, who confront their innermost desires. The second play is my pride play, Dave's Epic 40th Birthday Party. The tagline I came up with is revenge a dish best served cold, or steaming, sweltering hot? Greed is the third play in the collection, which is The Tale of Dakota Dawson. Dostoyevsky is the fourth play in the series, which is my envy play, although a lot of these plays are envy plays, but this is the most envious. Gluttony was a challenge, but The Cautionary Tale of Big Ed Delahanty, which is 5th in the lineup, is definitely my gluttony play. Wrath is 6th, and my Wrath play is called Ruined. And the 7th and final play in the collection is Tupperware, which is my sloth play. This Hungry Churchyard is a play that I've written, I think is the most recent play written out of the collection. It was the first scene that I wrote of what ended up being a longer play called These Violent Delights, which is a continuation of Romeo and Juliet, except this one's written totally in rhyming verse, and there's zombies. So This Hungry Churchyard is my lust play, and it opens with Rosaline and Benvolio bemoaning the loss of Romeo and Juliet. It's set 3 days after the end of Romeo and Juliet. And one's assumption is that Rosaline, who was supposed to meet Romeo the day that he first saw Juliet and fell in love with her, that Rosaline is deeply in love with Romeo, and that Benvolio comes out, and the assumption is that he was deeply in love with Juliet. The initial reveal is they've actually both been in love with Romeo their entire lives, and they've come here with a magic elixir to bring him back to life. They had no idea that each other were involved. It's a silly approach, because the rhymes and the rhyming verse does add some complication to how they talk. But it's a lot of fun. They ultimately decide to bring Romeo back to life and let him choose who is going to be his companion forever. But something goes wrong, and he becomes a brainless zombie, and he kills them both, which is just my sense of humor. So it's a fun play to start the collection with. And then, as you can imagine, the full-length play is now the zombie apocalypse has been unleashed upon Verona, and then other Shakespearean characters, both from Romeo and Juliet and other plays, have to figure out how to stop that. So, and that play's been it's been really well taken care of in a lot of different places. It was produced at Short and Sweet Dublin last year, where it won Best Playwright, Best Director, Best Actor in a Male Role, Best Actor in a Female Role, and an honorary role for Best Corpse, because there was an actor who played Juliet who didn't move for 10 minutes, and she was great. And it's been had a number of readings and been produced a few times, also in LA and elsewhere. And I think people have just been drawn to it's got a big concept attached to it, and if you're a Shakespeare fan like I am, it speaks to that, and there's some insider stuff for Shakespeare folks. It's also teenagers. I don't think it's ever actually been played by teenagers, although I would love to see that. I think that's a very underestimated and underrealized version of Romeo and Juliet, how young our two hero and heroine are. But that's been a lot of fun. I feel like it's a pretty easy play to understand and produce. I don't know how zoomable it is, but it's certainly fun on stage. Pride is is Dave's epic 40th birthday party, and it's about two frenemies. One celebrating his 40th birthday, big expensive party plan, but the only guy who shows up is a guy he sort of knows a little bit from high school, and it's really awkward and weird. And the guy is wealthy and kind of fancy, but doesn't treat people really well. And turns out that Dave of Dave's epic 40th birthday party ruined our other guy's 10th birthday party by taking a shit on his birthday cake. So it's that kind of a play. And that this whole thing about ruining his 40th birthday was a long con about be nice to people because things come back around. The heartfelt part of it is that it doesn't end there. That these two men, neither of whom are sort of thrilled with how things have gone over their adult lives, can come together and say, like, kids are kids and adults are adults, and we should be adults. And they come together, I think, in a way that is hopefully just cornball enough, but also satisfying by the time it gets there. And that's been really fun. That's been a play that was done by Playground in LA, and was a Best of Playground, but it's been done some other places. It's sweet, in looking at these plays about sin and people behaving badly. It was interesting to see how brightly kindness shines through, sensitivity and intuitivity, and just being in the same place at the same time as somebody else and trying to reduce pretense and negativity, how powerful that is. And these are all moments of high drama, but even in regular times, like the value of that, the value of just being together, being honest, being present. It was interesting how many of the plays also included some of that. Not all of them do. Greed is the third play in the collection, which is The Tale of Dakota Dawson. Is a Wild West gunfight set in a present-day San Francisco advertising agency. So instead of using guns, they use taglines. And it's another pretty high-concept one about Dakota Dawson, who is sort of the white hat in the story, and she takes pretty much the typical white hat stance. Wilbur, Wyoming feels like she wronged him, and so that they have this gun battle. And again, it's about like the assumption and the negativity that we bring when we feel like we've been wronged. Like, instead of asking a reasonable question and getting to the bottom of a situation, let's assume the absolute worst because the other person has a different point of view, and then let's make a big stink about it and start saying all kinds of nasty things publicly, only to realize that maybe we were wrong in the first place. And that was another fun one. That was it's been done on Zoom, it's been done on Earth, and it's just been a hoot. People love playing the cowboys. It's got a great ensemble role where two people play 20. And it's or it could be produced with 20 people if you had 20 people, but it's a lot of fun. It's that one is a little bit more word play. I do like my words. I like to sort of dig into genre by there are these rules set up of what a horror play should be or what a Western would be, and I really like leaning into that and pushing against the edges and bringing in some surprise. So that's been a really fun part of that journey. So my envy play is Dostoyevsky, which is not about the great Russian novelist, though the play does start with some of his words. It's actually about two more former friends turn frenemies, which has become a recurring theme in this collection. But essentially, one thinks that he's caught the other one watching porn in the workplace actively. And so the one who's caught him, it's RJ who catches Clint, and he's just milking this for all it's worth, that he's going to get him fired. He's going to, he's always, that he's pretended to be friends, but he's always hated him and had all of these issues with him, and the person that RJ married was the love of his life, and RJ never knew, and all of this stuff. And then it ends up blowing up in both of their faces, and it ends up being very awkward and horrible for everybody involved. And this one has a really interesting journey, because it started with just like the superficial comic conceit of catching somebody watching porn actively in the workplace. But as I really started drilling down on it in terms of the psychology and the hurt between this guy who's been harboring all this resentment, and then there's a bit of a twist at the end that also speaks to another character who, despite perceived success and money, power, position, etc., has no connection to people that are important to him, has no way of coping with the world in a way that he can outwardly exist. He has to do things in secret and in private. And it became a much more complex play as I was writing it and as it was produced, that it's like, wait a minute. And it was a very just interesting moment for me, like thinking of the sort of superficial, almost in like a television sense, in a sitcom sense of like, oh, the hijinks that character A and character B got into, and then, oh, by the end of the episode, it's all resolved and we forget about it and move on. Because that's the format. That's the style. We have some crazy situation and ultimately it gets resolved. But if that crazy situation, or if a crazy situation was to appear in a world life, if somebody was to take such a strong point of view, or represent something so surprising or odd or unusual, or dump all of this baggage, what would that actually mean in the real world? What would you have to do to get to that place to actually talk to another human being in that way? And that was really telling. And it's kind of how I've always digested stories. I've always wondered about the depth and the meaning behind what's actually going on. But starting with sort of a superficial idea, like a kind of a shower idea, like, oh, that would be weird. That seems high stakes. That seems like there's some drama there. But digging into the hurt, that was really interesting, and I think that's helped it be. It was a finalist for the Heidemann. It's been published in a non-licensing anthology with Bonita Springs Performing Arts Center in Florida, and now it's going to be in this collection, which is a licensing anthology. And I think that there's something to the absurdity of the situation, but then there's also something, I hope, to the turn and to the acknowledgement and the engagement with feelings, with resentment, with hurt, and with hopefully resolution. My Gluttony play, which is the cautionary tale of Big Ed Delahanty. I've also written a longer play about Big Ed, who is a real person. He's a baseball player at the turn of 2 centuries ago, who was a big star in the 1880s and 90s, and died tragically in 1903 after being thrown off a train going over Niagara Falls for drunken disorderly conduct. His body was found 10 days later, missing a leg, being completely naked, and nobody knows what happened between the time he was kicked off the train and when they found him dead. And I first found out about Big Ed, and I'm a big baseball fan. See all the Dodger bobbleheads behind me are actually my brothers, but I've been going to Dodger games my whole life, and big baseball fan, and we went to the Baseball Hall of Fame. My brother, my father, my uncle, and I all went. And my uncle was reading Hall of Fame baseball trivia, and he said, what baseball player died in this way, whose body was found at the bottom of Niagara Falls? And we were like, what are you talking about? And I started reading about Big Ed, and it was like, man, there was so much stuff going on in his life. He was an all-star. He was very well paid for baseball players and for the time period especially. And nobody actually said it in any of the things that I read, but weaving all the different facts together, that he was kind of in the twilight of his career. He was 35, which is not the twilight of anything except for maybe a professional athletic career. So he wasn't as good. His numbers weren't as good. The hometown team, he's from Cleveland, and the Cleveland baseball team changed its name to the name of his great rival. something that no team had ever done before, and I don't think has ever done since. There have been homages to players, but they actually changed their name to the Cleveland Naps after Nap Lajoie. He was not doing well. His team wasn't doing well. He wasn't home. He wanted to be home. He had an opportunity to play for his good friend in New York, which is where his wife and his daughter were. He couldn't make that happen. And then he starts threatening people on a train with a straight razor, and he's getting super drunk. And the next thing we know, he's kicked off a train and he's found dead at the bottom of a waterfall. And just, it seemed very clear to me that he was depressed, that he was not being cared for, because it was 1903. And first of all, nobody was dealing with anybody's psychology at that point. We were just getting to the beginnings of the things that would lead to Sigmund Freud. Like, we're way far away from any of that. And then at the time, especially for men, and especially men who are in professions where strength and resolve and constitution are so prized, it was probably never considered how he was dealing with the fact that there were these big, complicated things going on in his life. And then combining that just with celebrity culture, when I was working on this, I think Heath Ledger had just died, and a version of the play had quotes from Heath Ledger and Whitney Houston and Robin Williams, and just because there was, around the death of Big Ed Delahanty, there was this question of, did he commit suicide? Did he jump into Niagara Falls? Was he murdered? Like there's Steve McNair quotes in here and other, things like did somebody rob him because he was showing off this jewelry? Also, there was an attempted assault on a woman on the train. Was somebody mad at him for that? Or was it an accident? Was he just stumbling around drunk, dark, over the ridge above Niagara Falls Gorge, and he just fell in? And the predominant sentiment, nobody really knows for sure, is that it was an accident. We don't know, but there's no specific indication of murder or suicide, so they say it was an accident. But the big question about the play, and it was very interesting because I usually don't write about real people, but being sensitive to a person who has living descendants, a person who we know a bit about, but we don't know a huge amount about, because it was at a time in history where baseball wasn't as big of a deal, so his every move wasn't recorded and anthologized the way that even by the time we get to Babe Ruth in the 20s and his youth in the teens, we know a lot more about it than somebody who's was born in the 1870s. So it's an interesting play. It's also presented as a old-timey vaudeville show. So there's an ensemble that are the train conductor, that are the woman on the train who he assaulted, that are fans, that are his teammates. There's a bunch of different people who come in and out of his life as these sort of larger-than-life vaudevillians tell this story. The only one who isn't a vaudevillian is Big Ed himself, who brings you into his story. He's not a terribly likable person. He's very selfish and self-involved. He does not apologize for what he does to this woman. Fortunately, he was stopped before things got horrible, but he scared the shit out of her and never had to deal with that in his life. He also left his wife and his daughter totally destitute, spent their money, and at the same time, it's never pleasurable to see somebody suffer. I think it's against human nature to wish ill upon anybody, even as hard as that can be, no matter what they've done or what they stand for, even. And I think it's an interesting play of the complexity of celebrity worship, how discussions of everything from mental illness to just not feeling great have evolved over the decades and centuries, and how many people have we lost throughout history because people around them weren't talking to them, weren't having heartfelt conversations with them, weren't checking in. And it's a Big Ed story is really amazing. So the long play is called Big Ed the King of Swatsville, but this is the short, the cautionary tale of Big Ed Delahanty. It's been done as a radio play, which I thought was really effective. It's been a number of stage readings, and I think it's going to be produced early next year, assuming we can all do what we do. So ruined, R-U-N-E-D, is a word I made up mostly because of how my cousin, when he was young, said the word ruined, that he said ruined, and I just always thought that was funny. But it's a riff on the M.R. James play, M.R. James short story, Casting the Runes. And it's actually a bit of a spoof of a play that a friend of mine wrote for Wicked Lit, that Jeff Rack wrote for Wicked Lit, and he knows this, so it's no surprise. But I took sort of a version of his characters and a version of his situation, combine it with the original source material, and it's a madcap comedy about somebody who's been cursed by an evil rune, and how he gets himself uncursed. And this is my wrath play, because part of the curse is that you get torn apart by evil beasties, and it's a horror comedy inspired by horrible physical violence. That's very silly, and one of the first productions was at the Heartland Theater Festival in Normal, Illinois, and they did a really great job. It's been produced at high schools and a number of other theaters and other places. And it's fun. It's one of those plays that I didn't even think people were going to get, because I wrote it as a response to a Wicked Lit play that 1,500 people saw, but I didn't know about the rest of the world. But it's been very well received, and it's another one that's it's 4 characters, and you get it. And I've been told it has one of the best endings of any short play that people have seen. So take that for what you will. And the last play that of 7 Deadly Tens, Tupperware, is my sloth play, and this is probably the oldest play of what's in the collection. It was actually based on an idea by my wife, who is a chemist. She got her PhD from Caltech and is a chemistry professor at Pomona College. So she said, I'm not going to write this play, but I have an idea for a play that you should write. And I wrote it, and I showed it to her, and she said, I don't like this at all. And I said, well, I like it. And it was a finalist for the Haida Minute Actors Theater Louisville. It's been produced. And it's about a guy, this is my sloth play, and it's about a guy who's just not really paying attention to his longtime girlfriend. It's poker night, and his friends start to notice just weird things around the house. There's all these Tupperware containers in his fridge, and there's all these labels and instructions, and our guy is like, yeah, she's very thorough and very careful and really appreciate everything she does. And, and they keep looking in the cabinets, and everything's in Tupperware with labels, and they get into the freezer, and there's more, and they realize, oh man, she left this guy, like she's not coming back. And he is just so he's so not paying attention and so kind of into himself and his laziness that he kind of lost the best thing that's ever happened in his life, which probably isn't such a bad thing. Like, good for her. But it's a fun one. It's a nice one because the audience gets to really go on the ride with the characters and see, like, oh, wait, that is weird. And, like, these other guys aren't exactly the most woke and with it in terms of emotions and just the world around them anyway. But they sort of see the writing on the wall and realize, like, dude, you really messed this up. So that's Tupperware. I don't know if I'm giving too many spoilers on all this, but I want to give some of the context for for what the plays are. My big goal with what a reader or an audience member might get from engaging with these plays is the diversity and range of human experience and the capture of any moments that really strike you personally, whether as something you agree with or something you don't. The plays all are about sin. There's a sin at the heart of each of them. There is a willful negative act, which has judgment associated with it. But I think that that's appropriate too. And some of these things are done and it's presented more in jest. Some of these things are done and it's more dramatic and serious. But I think all of it carries some emotional weight. And it's perfectly likely that not every play will be as affecting to any individual person as every other play. I mean, that's just the nature of experiencing stories. But I have a feeling that there will be one or two that resonate with one way or another. And I would hope that it's an opportunity to have a good time, to engage in the world around you, and just rejoice in the fun that is storytelling with the actors in your head, or with the actors on your screen, or with the actors on the stage. But to really lean into those, like, there's some parts of these plays that bite. And some of those bites are unexpected. Some of them you think you're just tootling along on a merry-go-round, but then you take that wrong turn and you get a 2x4 over your top of your head. And just deal with that. Like, why is that bothering you so much? And you can email me, and I'd love to talk with you about it. My hope is that it's the themes and the bigger questions that the plays are asking and conjuring up that are worthy of conversation with you and whoever you see the plays with, or whoever you share your thoughts with, even if that's yourself. I try not to write purely superficially. That's something I do my best to hold myself to. There's something in there that bothers me about the world, about myself, about choices I've made. And so I think that that's all there for me to say, this is what I've been through and this is how I feel and how I think. I'd love to bring you into this conversation, and let's hash it out. And maybe we have a good time doing that. Maybe we can feel like we're better people because of it. But it's I hope that's something that you're left with, something thought-provoking and enjoyable. The best reason to buy this collection, as it were, is to get that range of style and storytelling of the short form. There's, lyrical tragi-comedy. There's very straightforward office, dark, dramatic tragedy. There's a producibility and an accessibility to it. There's also a scale and a theatricality to it that make it very elevated. I think it's pretty unique in terms of what other collections are out there, especially for younger people. I think young people are really pretty savvy. I think sometimes what we give to high school students in particular is very much a watered down version of what we think they can handle. And I think especially teenagers, but even, I'm not saying these plays are right for 9 and 10-year-olds, but I think even 9 and 10-year-olds can handle a lot more than we give them credit for in terms of storytelling and complex thought. I think there's a lot here that works as a cohesive evening. There's a lot of roles that are scalable for large and small cast. It's not quite equal men and women roles, but there's a lot there just to provide opportunities for actors to really sink their teeth into. I've been told by directors of all of these plays that there's a lot there, yet it's not so complicated that it's impossible to produce in a short play festival format or something like that. I think it's also a way to start really great conversations, because sometimes starting from a place of humor or absurdity or genre is a way to say, okay, we can all get on board with this together. It's not going to push me out of my comfort zone too quickly, or at least too far. But then, like the frog in the boiling water, as you find yourself wading through the comedy or through the absurd, you may find yourself in some pretty wonderful, engaging places that could turn into great conversations after the play is over, or maybe even long after you see or read the play. I think it's a good collection, especially, I would say, for young men. I think that there's a lot of expectation and difficulty in growing up generally, and I've had some very enlightening conversations with young men where they're encountered with their own emotions and feelings and complexity of that, and they don't know how to express it, like literally don't have the words. And I think these plays actually have a lot of men dealing with stuff, or not dealing with stuff, and then dealing with the consequences thereof. And I hope that there's value to that. I hope that there's something that a young man and a friend or a parent or a guardian or a loved one could say, I see those feelings, I feel those feelings, but what am I supposed to do? Or aren't I supposed to be this way or act this way? Isn't this what I should do? And I think the play will give an opportunity to say, well, you need to do what you need to do, but let's consider a range of things that are going on. Let's not treat this thing as something basic. It's complex. I think a lot of times young men are expected just to deal with it. I think a lot of times all of us are expected to deal with it, but there's something about the coming of age time period that is especially hard. And thinking about high school, especially reading these plays, make me think that there's something here that could be valuable beyond an entertainment, a class exercise, all of the great value and wonder that comes with producing theater. I think that there's something here that could resonate in that way. So Seven Deadly Tens is available at originalworkspublishing.com and also Amazon. And Original Works can also handle all of the licensing if you're interested in producing any or all of the plays. They're really great folks. They'll take good care of you.